Good evening, and welcome to the ShadowTrader video weekly for Sunday, May 11th, 2008. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Let's hop right into things. We've got a lot to cover today. This is the current trend line here in the S&P. You can see that we've pretty much sold off right to it. So we're kind of in a do-or-die situation here. The market really needs to hold this trend line if it's going to power higher. It is a key area. There is a 20 MA here. I do think the market should have at least a pretty good chance, and I'll show you why in a second, of holding this because it is the first test of the 20 after a nice up leg here where we've moved held above the 24 It took us a while to break over it. It was back earlier in the middle of April. We broke out. Now we're coming back to the 20. One of the things I've noticed under the hood as we've pulled back a bit is if you look at this spider chart here, I use this sometimes in the videos to show breadth relationship and price. And this is really important because this kind of makes you more than just a technical trader. I really like using these breadth analyses because if you just look at patterns, I often used to say in the broadcast, the pattern is the last thing. Don't just rely on the pattern. You really want to see what's going on under the hood. That means that if you're looking at an individual stock, you want to look at on-balance volume and things like that, so you're not just relying on the pattern. But one of the things that I have noticed as the S&P pulled back that I like is the fact that Friday the Dow was down 120, the S&P lost another 9, right? And yet the breadth made a higher low. You can see here, this figure here, for those of you new to the video, is basically just the relationship between up and down volume. It takes the up volume and then divides it by the total. So when that number is basing around 50, it's obviously at parity because that up volume would be half of the total, which is the denominator. And when it's over, it's a little bit more bullish. That indicates positive breadth, and underneath is negative breadth. So as you can see, as the market's pulled back here, we've spent most of our time underneath parity, which is natural because breadth is usually negative when the market's going down. However, I like to see divergences like this when the market goes lower but the breadth doesn't. Okay, and on top of the breadth, the advanced decline line, which is the other internal that I monitor just as closely as the breadth, is the fact that when we were looking at the S&P intraday on Friday, right, this is what the spider was doing. Here's basically the market, right? This is the S&P. And you can see that we kind of made a double bottom here, right? And except for the spike late in the day, the market didn't really go anywhere. It kind of, it still closed negative. We've off 120 on the Dow. But when you look at the AD line, right, there was a huge spike at the open down to minus 1,000, but then it kind of spent the rest of the day going up. And I like the way it closed here at minus 250, which is really not so bad. I would have expected a lot worse. So that, when you put all these things together, it indicates to me that there is some growing demand for stocks at the trend line here. Obviously, things are tenuous here. Anything can happen. The way to play this is simply to wait it out. You don't want to be getting too heavily long unless you can take out the high here, which would make a lot of sense. So if the Friday's high is taken out in the spider, I would say that's actually even a low-risk entry for longs, not only in most stocks on pullbacks, whatever, but also in the broad market itself. It's probably worth a shot to take some spider right there, possibly even some diamond, which I like the doji. A little bit of a break with 20 MA here, but it's holding. Dow has just had a number of days down. So just wait for these broad market ETFs to take out these levels, okay? And again, I will be the first one to say that it does look tenuous. I mean, we have kind of a lot at stake here. If we lose the trend line, then one of a couple of different scenarios can happen. Excuse me. We could either have the market race down to this 50 MA, which is probably not likely. We would really have to have a confirmed closing daily bar, say somewhere under 1380, or it could be what's known as the undercut, which is when strong stocks or strong indices do kind of a fake out move. They undercut the trend line and then end up rallying back up. But we shall see. I mean, the main thing to me when trading overnight is to simply wait for confirmation. Don't guess, don't assume that something's going to happen. Wait for confirmation. If the S&P can move up over Friday's high, as we know, we've come in gently to the 20 MA, it would make sense that it's a buy point. It's that simple. And then you have a relatively tight stop ahead of you, right underneath that point. Okay, so that being said, let's point out some stocks that I think are going to be strong going forward in the next week. And I also want to show you some stuff that's looking weak, where if the market does end up breaking the trend line and we end up getting a down leg here rather than a continuation of this up move, I want to show you a couple of things I'm looking at on the short side that may be of note to you. The first thing I want to talk about is Brazil, which is this ETF here, EWZ, which looks great. What had happened in here, where you see this big spike, is that Standard & Poor's raised their rating basically on the entire country, on all of Brazil. Things are really booming there, as you know. It's quite an emerging market, and shares of companies there are doing quite well. One of the things I'm looking at for a possible move up this week is Banco Bradesco, which is BBD. IBD loves this stock. This is the big spike on the S&P news, and then it kind of deflated. But I like the way it deflated on somewhat lesser volume, but what interests me even more is where it deflated to, right? See that we're coming right into trend line support here, plus the 20 MA, plus notice that this area here at the $22 area, right, was prior high. There was a good strong cluster of prices here that hit its head on 22, right? And then as prices broke over 22, you had a strong move up. Look at the cluster here as well. Same thing. So there's a lot of supply and demand action back and forth here at the 22. That usually supports. Remember, technically, moves that are straight up like this don't support. As you notice, this move straight up didn't support much. But now that you're coming into an area where there were prior highs, I would expect that this is probably a relatively safe entry point, and the stock should move up. The fundamentals are great. The outlook is phenomenal for banking in Brazil. This is probably a decent idea. ITU is in the exact same sector. It's pretty much identical, as you can see. Same thing. It's a bank, Banco Itaú Holding, Financiera, whatever, and it's the same thing. You know, you have the trend line support. You have the 20 MA. Also coming out of Brazil is Rio, also known as CVDR, the acronym for the company name here. This is mining, obviously. There's a kind of a short trend here. I like the hammer. We could probably come in a little bit lower to the 20 MA, but it does look very, very strong. Or also, okay, also on the long side, let's take a look at this. I want to show you Autodesk. These are makers of computer-aided design stuff for architects, basically. But I like the weekly. What drew me to the stock is that I do scans on the weekends for patterns like this, where I see tight ranges in dojis or hammers on weekly bars. This is one of my favorite patterns to scan for. I spend a number of hours each weekend looking for patterns like this, and I think you should too. Because what happens when you see a couple of bars on the weekly next to each other that have tight ranges or opens and closes in the same area? Well, basically what that tells you is you know that the stock has been caught up in a range for 10 days, right? Basically, each one of these weekly bars is 5 entire trading days, so 2 weekly bars is 10 trading days. So when you see a stock caught in a tight range, when you switch from the weekly to the daily, look what you get. You can see the tight range, obviously, looking at the daily, right? And this is basically causing a lot of pressure in the stock. Right? And when I go back to the weekly, again, to the left of the chart, which is important, where I want the stock to move to, there's not a lot of resistance. Why? Because there's not that cluster of prices, right? And notice that this area here, where for 3 weeks the stock kind of came into support and chopped around, is a support area, right? Here where it paused again is a support area. So I would be expecting that as the stock moves up and over this area, right, where there's no more clusters here, you're going to move probably to the next level of resistance, which I would say would be the 45. So that's something to look at. Okay, on the short side, I want you guys to look at FMCN, Focus Media Holding, which I think is rolling over here, and looks like it may have somewhat of a some down leg to it. What I like about it is that notice that the stock has moved up, but the on balance volume kind of froze here. Okay, I have older videos that detail what the OBV is, but you can just go to Investopedia or whatever. And the last one I want to show you is something called Faro, which I think is semis. And notice this, it's just a beautiful pattern. And what I like about it is, look, there's a lot, this is on the short side, there's a lot more room left to fill this gap. So I think that on a breakdown play here, notice you had an inverted hammer on the dailies. Short this low here probably. And again, what I like about it, there's room to fill, probably a gap fill down to this area. All right, that's all the time I have for today. Thanks for listening. On behalf of myself and the entire ShadowTrader team in beautiful Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and of course, as always, from all the good people in Chicago, Illinois, at the one and only Thinkorswim, I wish you good trading and good night.